Very strange, uncanny voice, but welcome everyone, and thank you for taking some time out of your afternoon to join us. And especially welcome to Back to Basics, a deeper look at some initiatives in early childhood education here in the South Coast. My name is Ray Paul Byron, and I'm the president of Theresa Street, who is hosting this presentation today. We're going to start off with a brief introduction about Theresa Street, move over to an introduction NorthStar, which is our presenter today, and then NorthStar will present for about 40 minutes, and we will finish with about 10 minutes of Q&A. So just a little bit of background on Theresa Street. It was founded in 2020 with the goal and mission of raising funds, mutual aid, and awareness for local organizations and causes that we feel does meaningful and measurable work in the South Coast. And for those that don't know, the South Coast is a region about an hour south of Boston, the state of Massachusetts, between the city of Providence and Cape Cod. And we work with a variety of organizations. One is Learn to Cope, which helps individuals recovering from addiction. The other is Bish Strong, which is an organization that raises money for one of our friends who was tragically paralyzed from the upper chest down. We also work with the local chapter of Ronald McDonald House, the Dartmouth Special Olympics, and of course our fantastic partner NorthStar, who I will introduce more extensively shortly. And our model is a little bit different. So we look to run fun, competitive, and impactful events that raise funds and awareness for organizations. For example, we have the Theresa Street Summer Classic, our 13th wiffle ball tournament coming up in 2 weekends. And not only is it, we think, the premier wiffle ball tournament in the world in terms of competition, but we also look to raise a good amount of money as well. And this year, our target is $10,000, and we hope to greatly surpass that in the coming weeks. And so for more information about Theresa Street or the work we do, please feel free to visit theresastreet.org, specifically look at the events page to see what's coming up. And we hope to see you in a couple of weekends on Theresa Street for the Summer Classic. So we're very excited for that. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. So now I'd like to turn the full focus of the presentation to NorthStar. I'm joined today by Dr. Zoe Hanson-DeBello, who is Director of Innovation at NorthStar. NorthStar is a New Bedford-based nonprofit that was founded in 1974 during the Civil Rights Movement. I'm just going to read its mission quickly. The mission is to help young people overcome poverty, discrimination, educational disadvantage, violence, and other adversity through learning essential competencies and hopefulness with which they can transform their lives and communities. In advocacy and public policy, we as a minority-led nonprofit organization advance diversity as a strength and resource to open pathways to create a better life. So at Theresa Street, we fully believe in and support this mission, and we're very excited to focus on NorthStar as one of the beneficiaries of our fundraising this year for the Theresa Street Summer Classic. And we're especially excited about the recent work in early childhood education, which Dr. Hanson-DeBello will speak more about now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ray. It's a pleasure to be here virtually with all of you. If you at any point feel comfortable showing your face, that would be greatly appreciated. It's a little strange to talk into an abyss, but I can also just speak to you, Ray, and everybody else listening. Oh, hi, Christian. Oh, 2 of you, a twofer. How exciting. Nice to see you. So I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about one of our really exciting initiatives called the Basics Southcoast. NorthStar Learning Centers, as Ray mentioned, is a multi-service organization. We do everything from early childhood to after-school programming, family support services, positive youth development work, gun violence prevention and intervention. We have a mental health clinic, and we also run and convene a coalition called the South Coast Coalition for Early Childhood Education. And that is what I'll be talking about today and the basics on the South Coast. So I'm going to share my screen. And so I have a little presentation and a little video, and then I really want this to be a dialogue. So at a few points, I'm just going to stop talking, and this is a community-based initiative, and so I really welcome kind of questions and thoughts and having a conversation with you today more than just a presentation. So let me just share my screen. Let me see, view, present. Can everyone see that? Great. So this is the Basics Southcoast. Down here, and just for context, you're going to see the logo for the Southcoast Coalition for Early Childhood Education. That actually evolved out of NorthStar's capital campaign initiative that we're in the middle of right now. That actually Theresa Street has been very generous contributors to, and we're very appreciative of that. We're in the middle of a capital campaign to build a brand new early childhood education and community center in the south end of New Bedford that will consolidate two of our programs, our current early childhood education sites, and also expand our capacity from serving 98 children to 134. So as Maria Rosario, our executive director, and myself went around sharing about this capital campaign, we realized, this was about 2 years ago, we realized that all these different organizations on the South Coast were prioritizing or putting early childhood development and education into their strategic plans. And while that's wonderful, and we definitely want to support that, we also realized that they hadn't been providers of early education. And so they didn't really have the grassroots or boots on the ground experience to be leading the solutions in the field. And so we took the opportunity to gather some thought leaders and from both Fall River and New Bedford. I'm originally from Providence, Rhode Island. And so it's been a really fun adventure bringing Fall River and New Bedford folks together in the same room to do collaborative work, but nonetheless, we've done it. And what started as about 7 people around the table is now a robust network of 85 different stakeholders, executive leadership, and also change agents that we've identified as gatekeepers of specific sectors. So that initiative is really what houses the Basics Southcoast, which I'm going to share more with you today. So I want to ground us in kind of the why we do this work, the why we care about early childhood development. Why do we care? Well, 80% of brain growth occurs by the age of 3, 90% by the age of 5. And actually 70% in year 1, which is huge. And when we think about kind of what happens in year 1 being so critical to just the ripple effect for the rest of your life. And so if we want to address social justice and race equity, and we really need to look at root cause solutions. And for us, where 80% of your brain growth occurs is a root cause solution that we're invested in. Now, to kind of deepen the statistic or this picture, developmental skill gaps by race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status are very visible in brain scans by 2 years old. So in year 1, you don't see that much difference. You could look across race, you could look in different kind of socioeconomic neighborhoods, and you wouldn't see that difference of development. But as soon as 2 years old hits, it's about a 10-point difference. It's pretty significant. And that's also by gender. And so there's all these contributing factors, but the fact of the matter is that when we talk about opportunity gaps and achievement gaps in K through 12 schools, we're never going to close those unless we look to early childhood, because kids are entering kindergarten already behind the 8 ball. And once you're behind, the statistics are pretty clear, that the numbers are clear that you stay behind. Now, the good news is, because that's really depressing, the good news is that we can change this reality, right? Like if we invest in early childhood development, we can literally change the trajectory of kids' lives, which I believe will radically change how our public schools look. It will change how the health of our community, the wellness, the happiness, and our workforce development. So it's an economic issue too. So this kind of gives you, I love this slide. This gives you the real kind of picture of the neuron growth over time and connections over time from a newborn to 1 month old, 9 month old, 2 years old, and an adult. And we kind of sectioned out the 2-year-old and the adult because you'll notice that though the brain looks really similar for a 2-year-old and an adult. Now, what is different in those 2 scans is that there's a lot more activity happening in a 2-year-old's brain. A lot more learning is happening every day. There's millions of connections and neural pathways that are being formed every day. And as you move into adulthood, the certain pathways will strengthen, but then what will happen is a pruning process. So what you're not using, you lose. It's kind of like working out. I don't know how many people are lifting weights over here, but if you don't use your muscles, you lose them. And so there's this window of time in the first 3 years of life that the more you use the muscle of your brain, the more it will stick around over time, and those pathways are going to be really strong and not kind of prune away. So it's important that this time period in brain development is really given special attention. This is another graph to just kind of share, drive this point home that this is really a race equity issue, and it speaks to kind of that 2-year-old brain scan. So and how it amplifies over time, right? So we see the differences starting in 2 years old, but when we kind of see that difference starts at 2, and then we see that over the course of a kid's career in academics, by the time kids are 17 years old, on average, white kids are 3 to 4 years ahead of their Latino, Native American, and Black peers. That's huge, and that's wrong, and we need to do something to fix that. It's an incredible inequity, and it starts so young. So I want to kind of put the Boston Basics, or put the Basics, tell you a little bit about how the Basics got started, and then tell you a little bit about what they are and what NorthStar is doing with them in the South Coast. So the Boston Basics was a initiative started by Dr. Ron Ferguson. He is a economist at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's the faculty director for the Harvard Achievement Gap Initiative. And he spent his entire career looking at the race equity and racial opportunity gaps in K through 12 schools. And then about 10 years ago, he learned the brain science around early childhood development and completely changed course. He kind of recognized what I just shared with you, is that, you know, if we're looking to really change the game for kids or for society, we really need to look to early childhood. That's what the science tells us to do. And so he, realizing that he's not an early childhood person, pulled in his peers in the Boston area from the Boston Children's Museum, Boston Children's Hospital. He engaged the Black Philanthropy Fund at the Boston Foundation, and together they looked at all of the science, and they came up with 5 simple science-based parenting and caregiving tenets that support social, emotional, and cognitive development in children birth to age 3. And the way that they decided to kind of build this out, they wanted to come up with a method or a strategy that would get this information, these 5 basic tenets, these 5 basic principles, into the hands of every caregiver. And the way that they decided to best do that is through a public health kind of public awareness campaign. And so originally the Boston Basics, it was called the Boston Basics campaign. And they put billboards up and buses and started just like flooding the community with messages, kind of similar to, like, you know, how do we get people to quit smoking? Like, you know, it was a big kind of public health awareness campaign. And so they viewed, and I agree, that early childhood development is a public health issue, and it is a social determinant of health. And so it kind of, it fits very, it's not necessarily education. It's really, it's more of a community initiative, a public health initiative, than it is like an education, which tends to be more center-based or like school-based. When you think about education, you think about, you know, 4 walls around you, rather than a public health campaign, which is really a community-based solution. So I'm going to go and tell you about what the basics are in just a second, but I also wanted to share that our role that we're playing is the South Coast Basics is one chapter of a whole basic learning network. So there are about 50 plus different communities across the United States that have picked up the basics and started implementing them. And there's 6 different countries. So that's really exciting. Ron and his team at Harvard, and I guess it's actually not at Harvard anymore. The Basics has now become its own 501c3. But they haven't done any kind of like pushing out of Boston of this initiative. But people have been searching for community-based solutions to early childhood development. They have found the basics, and they reached out to Ron. The first community was Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they reached out to Ron 5 years ago and said, "Hey, we want in. What is this basics you're doing? And we want to do it too." And it was a collaboration between the Chattanooga Chamber of Commerce and the United Way. And Ron kind of said to them, well, we're not really ready. I mean, we don't even really know what we're doing. We just started this and we're seeing how it goes. And the CEO of the president of the Chamber of Commerce said, "It's okay, we'll figure it out together." And that has kind of been the ethos of this whole Basic Learning Network community, is we're just figuring out together. And so I'm on calls every month, sharing what we're doing here on the South Coast, but also learning from these different communities across the United States about what they're doing. And we just are crowdsourcing innovation, which I think is really cool, because I think that this is more than just a moment. I think what we're building is a movement, and that's really exciting. So what are these basics? The 5 basics are to maximize love, manage stress, talk, sing, and point, count, group, and compare, explore through movement and play, and read and discuss stories. And I come to this work, passionate about it in my career, but also on a personal level. I have a 4-year-old at home, and I learned about the basics when she was 2 years old. And I felt really lucky to learn them when she was 2, because you don't know what you don't know. And at the same time, I was like, said to my husband, oh my gosh, we only have 1 more year and 80% of her brain growth has happened. So we were doing a lot of these. I think this is a really asset-based initiative where we do all of this to some extent. The point of the basics is to be intentional about it and to do more of it. Because the more you do it, the stronger the more robust that brain is going to be, right? And so I always use the example of I counted with Rowan, but I wasn't intentional about grouping and comparing. And once I started to be intentional about it, she picked it up like that and just groups and compares everything. Whether it's rocks, whether it's the size of cars, whether it's the colors she's seeing, the basics is about making life the curriculum. And it doesn't require resources. It doesn't require, buying materials. It's a state of mind. It's an ideology. And so that's what I think is really powerful about this. So the basics, the basics realized that just kind of talking about the 5 basics wasn't enough to kind of change behavior, and that communities needed a toolkit to think about how they communicate what the basics are to their participants and the people in their communities. So they partnered, one of the tools they came up with were these 5 basic videos. Each one kind of goes deeper into what that basic is and how it looks like in action. And they partnered with WGBH to create these. And I just want to share one with you. I think I'll share the count, group, and compare one actually, because it changed my parenting. Oh, look at all these faces now. Oh, this is fun. Hold on 1 second. Let me get this up and make sure I share sound. Okay. Can you see and hear that? Can someone just tell me? You can't see.
Yeah, we can. Yep.
Yeah, you can? Okay, great.
How do children learn to count, group, and compare?
1, 2.
People often make statements like, I'm just not a math person. But actually, we're all born to be math people.
And then
Fascinating new science shows that babies come into the world already wired to learn math concepts.
1, 2, 3.
And what they learn in those first few years makes a difference when they start school.
It's important to count because counting is the basis of so many different things that we do.
1. Good job. 2.
Even if they might not show interest in that moment,
Good job.
doing it over and over again is so important.
Let's count.
Learning to count is a first and important step.
3.
Children learn to count strings of numbers before they really understand what the numbers mean.
2, 3.
The next big leap is to understand how many things each number stands for.
What we do with her blocks is we'll go 1, then put 2 together, then put 3 together, put 4 together, and 5. So what we want to see is if she can gradually make it from knowing the 1 is the 1 and the 5 is actually 5 different things.
In other words, the number 4 or the number 5 represent 4 or 5 of something.
Do you want to help us fold some laundry?
So when you're with your child, talk about numbers and connect those numbers to groups of things.
Hi,
How many socks?
1, 2.
Two socks.
She just celebrated her 3rd birthday, so we made a wall of 3s. She's 3 years old. There's 3 sides to a triangle. There's 3 parts to an egg, a shell, the whiting, and the yolk. Honestly, I don't think it sinks in until later on she'll talk about there's 3 sides to a triangle. So I'm teaching her, but I don't expect her to get it right then.
How many more pushes do you want? We integrate counting as naturally as we do just talking. 3 pushes?
3 pushes?
You ready? So if there's something to count, we'll count it or ask them to count it.
Oh, you have 5 yogurt raisins. You just ate one. Now there's only 4 yogurt raisins. Beep, beep.
You don't need to set aside extra time for these things. Just talk about what you're seeing and doing as you go about your normal daily activities.
All right, let's get Lee.
Talk about shapes. Look for shapes when you're out and about. Talk about how far you have to walk to get home.
Everything is a teachable moment, from going on a walk to playing with toys to cooking dinner to folding laundry.
As you go about your day, talk about things like size and distance.
Look at the yellow square. And that's different than our blue rectangle.
By including your child in everyday activities and talking to them about the magnitudes and distances and the sizes of the things you touch, you are building foundations for math.
Spike really blew us away with some just like real math. She was like, there's 1, 2 chairs and 1, 2 couches. There's 4 chairs and couches, just like out of nowhere.
Someday you may hear the statement, yep, I'm a math person. When that day comes, take some of the credit.
6. I feel like right now she's a sponge and she's taking everything in. She is definitely learning from us. Every moment's a teaching moment in my mind. Good job.
How do you help your child learn to count, group, and compare? Which of your family members and friends should also see this video? Please join us and help spread the word.
So that was one of the basics. And they actually, one of the really cool tools that we're using to share with our partner organizations across the South Coast is this like really awesome video book. And inside it has each of the basics and it shows each of those videos, and it's rechargeable, so it's eco-friendly. It's very cool. And that actually, if we're talking about crowdsourcing, that idea for a video book came from Bridgeport, Connecticut. They asked Ron 3 years ago, hey, could you put those videos into a video book? And he was like, what's a video book? And he looked into it and he ordered those, and now the entire Basic Learning Network has access, which is pretty cool. People like those. So I'm going to share my screen again. Does anybody have any questions or comments at this point before I talk about like kind of our strategy for getting the basics across the South Coast?
I had 2 quick questions.
Yeah.
One is for maximize love and manage stress, the basic number 1. What's sort of a tangible example of how that's done? To me, this seems, the other ones, make immediate sense, and I just have to think a little bit more about that one. So I was just wondering.
Are you a parent?
No.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stress in parenting, but there's also the maximize love is really, really important. I think it's something, I'm glad you asked that question, because I actually think that's the most important basic of all, especially in that first year of life. And in all of Ron's materials and kind of the text messaging, if you were to get text messages from the moment your child's born, he offers text messages that align with your child's age for the first 3 years. Most of the text messages in that first year of life are all about maximizing love and managing stress. So having a newborn baby is incredibly stressful, right? You're sleep deprived. Your baby could be, colicky, could be, there's all types of new things, especially if it's your first child. I mean, you don't even, that's part of why I love the basics. Because when I had Rowan, I feel like I left Southcoast Health and like they said, you have a car seat? And I said, yeah, and off I went, like keep this child alive. So maximizing love is about secure attachment. So when you have skin to skin contact, when you go back and forth with your baby, when you talk to them, when you smile at them, all of that is, they are developing, they're mimicking you, they're learning about what facial expressions mean, but they're also developing secure attachment. And what happens in that first year of life is the development of the prefrontal cortex. I'm not a neuroscientist, so these are like, I'm not speaking from a place of really knowing this stuff deeply, but from what I understand, your prefrontal cortex is developed in that first year of life, and it is what allows you to have emotional regulation. And it also contributes to your ability to connect and collaborate and build with others. So when we think about that development and that secure attachment, and then we fast forward to maybe when that kid is in 3rd grade, when we see behavioral challenges, like a kid just has meltdowns, cannot really regulate themselves, gets really angry quickly and doesn't really know how to self-soothe, doesn't know kind of how to work in a group setting, you could probably trace that back to their first year of life and not having enough love, right? And love seems really broad, but love is, how do you show love? How do you feel love? And that video, what time is it? It's 12:30. So I don't want to take up too much time, but that video, right, if you were to go and watch it, it really breaks down to, like, just from even holding your baby is showing them love, talking to them, singing to them. Yeah, all of that. And then managing your stress, like routines. The mother in that video talks about, like, just going outside every day, taking a walk around the block, using, if you have a partner in the house or a co-caregiver, if you can kind of, manage the stress with each other, because a lot of times that stress falls on the mother or the woman who is caregiving. And so how do you kind of work that, knowing how important it is for that kid's development? How do you be intentional about finding places to maximize love and manage your stress in healthy ways? Yeah.
Makes sense. I was also thinking, so this is from the perspective of the parents. I guess all of these are, but if there were ways, I guess for a 1-year-old, it might be difficult to manage stress. But maybe a 2-year-old or 3-year-old, there could be activities there too.
Yeah. And also the managing of, like, I say routines, that's for the management of stress for the kid and the parent. When the kid knows what's coming next in their day and they feel secure in that routine, they feel safe. And when you feel safe and you know what's coming, like right now, I mean, Rowan's 4, so she has a little more awareness of the world, but every night it's, what are we doing tomorrow? What are we doing after school? What are we doing? Like, she wants to know what's next, and knowing what's next gives her peace of mind. So if you know that you brush your teeth and you read a story and you have a glass of water and your parent reads to you and then you go to bed, and you put the stars on, that's the predictability that allows kids to feel safe to explore the world around them. If you don't feel safe, then you actually you're not exploring, which means you're not learning. Because you're too much in fight or flight. So
Makes sense.
Yeah. Anything else any other questions on what the basics are before I kind of talk about how we're changing the Southcoast with them?
I had actually one question.
Yeah.
A lot of the material is obviously geared towards, potentially new parents or, just parents getting back up to speed. Do you find that a lot of this material is also informative to, first-time grandparents who may be assisting, a busy home or something along those lines?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's for any caregiver of a child. And so that actually really feeds nicely into the rest of the presentation. I love it when that happens, because everyone has a role to play. This is definitely really super helpful for parents and caregivers, direct caregivers, but everybody in our community has a role to play in doing the basics and talking about them. So
that makes sense. Do you get a lot of kickback from some of the grandparents from like a older, different style of earlier education?
Honestly, I think the basics are nothing new to them. It's and a lot of this is like, we've moved away from the village, right? Like when you had a baby maybe 50 years ago, you had a community around you that was supporting you in different ways, and maybe only one parent was working, maybe like that. Our world looked different. And I think more and more as we've moved to just kind of hyper individualism, or thinking that school doesn't really start, or kids don't matter until they're in school. And I also think that caring about early childhood development education is deeply rooted in, gender biases and issues of race equity and feminism, right? Because when we think of who cares about young children, who watches young children, those are typically demographics that get pushed to second-class citizens. And they're not at the forefront of discussion of how important it is to support women in the workplace, to support, the caregiving of young children. That's kind of thought to be, a woman's job. So I think maybe there is some pushback if you think about like kind of traditional family values, but I have yet to meet pushback.
Sure.
People are really welcoming of this and are like, oh, that makes sense. It's basic.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Anyone else? I'll open it up again. So let's see here. So our strategy for kind of saturating the Southcoast. So what we want is that the basics are, I joke, but I'm also very serious about this. I want the basics and the logos and the messaging to be as instant recall as like Dunkin' Donuts. So when you see the orange D and you're like, oh yeah, that's Dunkin' Donuts. You know the color and the font and you probably are starting to crave a coffee. I want the basics to be that ingrained in like who we are. And so we are trying to saturate the community and every touch point so that a child and a caregiver experiences the messaging of the basics from multiple touch points every day. So what does that look like? So Ron talks about this idea of socio-ecological saturation. The idea that we look at where a caregiver and a young child might engage in society, from healthcare to school departments to shelters, libraries and museums, barbershops, childcare centers, family support programs, places of worship, employers, and housing developments. And so what Nick is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Development at NorthStar. What we are doing is we are going sector by sector and doing presentations like these to leadership in each sector and finding ways not to just put a poster up or a video book in the lobby, although that's great. Some places will just do that. But we're also aiming to institutionalize the basics into systems, policies, and practices. And so Southcoast Health is our lead partner on implementing the basics for kind of obvious reasons. They are where babies are born. So they're our leading birthing hospital. And so there's about 3,000 babies born a year on the South Coast. And so our idea is that if we can reach mothers, expecting mothers when they're expecting, that we put, the basics into birthing classes and parenting classes. We train OBGYNs and labor and delivery nurses and pediatricians and family medicine and baby cafes and anywhere where parents would kind of be engaging with healthcare. The basics will be a big part of that experience. And so our direct contact with Southcoast Health is in the community benefits office, which is really an amazing place to be. They are super helpful and dedicated to this cause, both internally at Southcoast Health, but also supporting NorthStar as the backbone for the Basics Southcoast. In July, you're going to see billboards up. You're going to be hearing PSAs on the radio. We're really kind of turning up the dial with our advertisement and our marketing. And Southcoast Health has really opened up their doors in-house to say, what do you need printed? How do we get this out there? And one day I was like, hey, I noticed you have a lot of billboards up. Could we use some of that space? And they were like, of course, let's design it. So they're really dedicated to this. The Community Benefits Office for the next 5 years is going to be focused on early childhood development as a social determinant of health. So it very neatly kind of fits their needs and fits our needs. But we're making our rounds. So Nick and I have talked, we've reached 500 different people from across these sectors in the past 4 months, and we continue the work. And I always like to think of presentations like these as a ripple effect. So everyone who attends kind of has your own circles and your own networks that you're a part of that could potentially be connected with the basics work. And so typically after I do one of these talks, I get, 2 or 3 leads to say, hey, I know someone at DCF who does the foster care training. Can I connect you to? Or, hey, I know a church that is really active in the community and I want, you to connect with their youth leader. And so it's up to me and Nick then to just follow those leads and follow those ripples. And hopefully we reach full saturation. So that behavioral change strategy is in 3 gears. You saw the one video, and so the first gear is really building the awareness and knowledge. And for that, there's a community toolkit that has the videos, posters, anything you can want. It's all downloadable free. And we're printing a whole bunch at Southcoast Health to kind of sprinkle around the community. Then parents need reminders. So the Basics 2 years ago designed the Basic Insights text messaging, which is available for free on our website for caregivers on the South Coast with children between 0 and 3 years old. And what the text messages do is they give you a try this, a fact on Monday and a try this on Wednesday. So it doesn't overload you, but it just kind of grounds you. And as we live busy lives and our dashboards, our bandwidth gets pretty full pretty quickly. And so to get just a little nudge, a little reminder to get on the ground and play with your kid, or to take a walk around the block, or to just take a deep breath is really helpful. And we've been getting the Basics as a whole has been getting really encouraging data back from the surveys of the participants, of the caregivers who have signed up for the text messages, that it actually does change their behavior, which is really great. And then the most important one for me is the trusted messengers and the social reinforcement. So to make the behavioral change really work, I could go down the street and tell everyone about the Basics I meet, but I don't know them. And so it's really important that we find the people who have the trust, who have the already built-in relationship, and we empower them with the knowledge around the Basics. And they then go and cast out that stone or that ripple effect in their own circles with the people who they know. So like I mentioned, we're the backbone, but Southcoast Health is our lead partner. This is just I kind of gave you the statistic, but normally sometimes I'll have Allie from the Community Benefits Office join me for presentations, and she just kind of reiterates their commitment to the Basics. And then I also mentioned that you are a critical part to the solution. So like I always, this isn't like a typical work call or presentation, but I do always want to just point out and encourage people to think of themselves both as in their careers and professional lives, but also in their personal lives. This work is it's blurred, those lines. And so there might be ways professionally that you can support and amplify the work of the Basics or embed it into your practice and your HR department or whatever. But there's also just the personal circles you have and the personal people you know. So to me, like I said, this work is personal. I go home and do the Basics every day. These are a list of the tools. It's all these are the text messages, just a little, and I'll share this presentation, Ray, you can share it with the group afterwards. And yeah, I'll stop sharing now, but that's the Basics. Any questions?
Thank you so much. Yeah. So I guess the floor is open for questions.
I have a question. I was wondering how you provide the Basics to local centers, like daycares, things like that. If it just goes up to the higher up, or if you guys do a more in-depth training for the actual staff members.
Yeah, so we have kind of parceled out month by month different sectors that we are trying to saturate. And so I believe early ed is going to be in the fall. And what we are hoping is kind of reaching out with a flyer and an invite to a Zoom PD to all of the providers that we can collect on a list. And then kind of doing a broad info session, but then leaving it open that if someone wants to follow up and have a more in-depth, personalized kind of what materials do you want? Do you need a poster? Do you want video books? We would kind of then follow that lead. So early ed is childcare is on the list of sectors that we are kind of strategically working through to saturate. and we are a provider as well. So we're kind of like practicing in-house and figuring out the things that work well and then replicating.
So I have a question about when funding comes in for your organization, how is it allocated? How do you?
Yeah, well, it depends on what it goes to. So if it's we're actually currently working on expanding our team for deploying the basics. The need is really high, and we don't have the capacity right now to support all of our implementation partners. We have about 45 different implementation partners that have just wanted to sign on, wanted to go more in depth, and we just, between me and Nick, we don't really have that capacity. So that's one area. And then materials, video books and stuff like that is another area. So the actual like materials to give parents. But the other piece that Theresa Street has contributed to is the capital campaign. So that goes directly obviously to our new center, but it's because NorthStar is so broad, it's either organizational kind of like operational costs, capacity building, or it's direct service and kind of direct materials.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I was curious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I just had a question a little bit about the history and the status of the basics today. So originally it was just in Boston, correct? And it sort of spread by word of mouth or people just looking up research potentially from Harvard University. And there was no marketing campaign at all, right? No local or national or international campaign, just sort of spread 50 different communities, 6 different countries, correct?
Yeah, and now, correct. And now since they've kind of moved out of the incubation of Harvard and are 501c3, they have hired kind of marketing consultants. I mean, they didn't come up with that brand, that logo, just like, doodling on a piece of paper. They have kind of pulled in consultants along the way, and they've grown rapidly. You are correct that they just kind of have been building the plane as they fly.
It's amazing.
And I would assume that in the next year or so, they're going to double their team. I think they have 4 or 5 full-time staff members right now, but I think they're going to double it.
Cool. So at this point now, it's more centralized, or at least like information is all coming from these different communities back to Boston, or back to this 501c3, this new like basics organization.
Yep. Yeah. So we have a Basics Learning Network forum. So like when we come up with a new idea, I can upload it to this forum, and anybody from any learning network can get it. So like the other day I was like, oh, I wonder if they have a placemat already created, because I really want to do placemats in restaurants with the QR code to access the text messaging. And I mean, we could design a placemat, but like, what if it's out there already? And sure enough, in Illinois, DeKalb County had already created a placemat, had already translated it into 3 languages. So I was able to just download and put our logo on it, and voila. And that's kind of the agreement to be part of this network, is that you are opening up your innovation to be borrowed by others. The Basics does have intellectual property rights over like their logo, and I think they're kind of putting more guidelines on how branding happens. So like there is a branding and styling handbook or guidelines, so that because imagine you have like 50 different places just kind of going and doing their own thing. So there are some parameters, but really the idea is that so much of this is open sourced because it is about the mission. But it's really exciting because there are some communities that are just neighborhoods, or like Yonkers, New York is a community, right? Or Chattanooga or something like that. But then there's also the state of Georgia is looking to implement the basics, and the state of Illinois. So now it's scaling up. So you have the Deal Center at Georgia College, who started giving out $25,000 seed grants to communities to look at early childhood development. This was 2 years ago. One of those communities decided to do the basics. They liked it so much that they now contracted with the basics, and every year for the next, I think it's 5 years, they're going to be giving out 10 $25,000 seed grants for every county in Georgia to do the basics. So that's kind of the scalability of this. I think that like it's really, I think that what we're doing on the South Coast and how we're leveraging healthcare is is something that will kind of be brought to be highlighted. I'm actually speaking at the Basics conference on Friday about our relationship with Southcoast Health as a backbone, because it's unique when I look at other basic learning network communities, but you can, learn from others. And then, hopefully one day the entire state of Massachusetts will be doing the basics, and it ripples out. And then we just have super smart kids who will do really amazing things.
That kind of leads to, I have one more question about measurements for success. And it's something that you're going to measure over years to come, I assume, but in the immediate, the next year, or when comparing against the different communities and different implementations, are there any metrics you're using at the moment, or is it more long-term?
I think that the metrics, so some metrics are coming from the text messages, right? So some are coming from direct surveys with caregivers who are self-reporting. Then there are, obviously kindergarten readiness is a metric, right? So what we're doing is on the South Coast, at least, we are trying to align how many babies are born, and then kind of looking at like who we're reaching with the basics, and then watching and tracking the kindergarten readiness levels. Data for kids under 5 years old is really like non-existent. It's really sad. Even census, oftentimes kids under 5 are missed on the census, which means they're not counted for 10 years, which is crazy. But we don't really know, like if you don't enroll your kid in early ed, we don't know much about you unless we go to the healthcare provider. And so what the coalition is trying to do is connect and foster and nurture that relationship between Fall River Public Schools, Wareham Public Schools, and New Bedford Public Schools and Southcoast Health. Like they should be talking to each other, because that Southcoast Health has the information. They even have the screenings on like, hey, it looks like special ed is going to be, we're seeing these markers, you should prepare, for what's and they just don't really talk to each other right now. So the basics, I think, is a nice bridge. And to your point about evaluation, like we need to be able to bring those partners together, those systems together, to figure out how we're going to track. And as we kind of saturate the South Coast with the basics, what happens to that cohort of kids when they enter kindergarten?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, in terms of materials, I know you spoke about the video books and like the posters, but I was wondering if you or the program have like lesson plans that certain centers could use, or that your center implements to help other caregivers really facilitate the basics?
Yeah, if you go online, and I'll share this website, but the community toolkit is a little, it can be a little tough to navigate, but there's so much there that I would recommend just like kind of clicking through different things. If you go and you look at, I think it's not presentation, it's under the, anyways, there's facilitated kind of mapped out parent group curriculums or frameworks. So it kind of takes you step by step, an hour session of talking about the basics, introducing the basics to parents or caregivers. And that's already been designed, so you can just literally print it out and follow it. So yeah, there's a lot of those types of materials available. Yeah, this work, actually, the program director for the basics in Boston, Hajai, spent a lot of his career in the Nurturing Fathers program. And so he's helped design a lot of these materials, and it's really lends itself nicely to parents and parent group kind of facilitation. I'm really hoping that like baby cafes and parent groups can just be amplified across the South Coast through this work, and maybe via early education centers too. Like maybe early ed centers can help support that movement, because the research also shows that when parents, the best changes or the best results happen when parents are in peer groups. Like that cohort model is really powerful, and the peer-to-peer learning is really powerful. So the more we can support that and have an infrastructure for that, I think the better. Because right now there's like parent baby cafes, even I think there's like 2 available. They're at different times. They're not multilingual. They're not in accessible locations for, so it's like, it's a certain demographic that gets to go and benefit from them.
I was wondering what it was like to kind of shift the programming from the basics, the Boston version of the basics, into something that is maybe more relevant for New Bedford or Fall River or other areas. Can you talk a little bit about how the programming can change based on the context of the city?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a great question. So I think that the framework of the basics is totally like place-based. So the tenets are the same, but how your strategy for implementation will vary. But well, your strategy won't vary. The socio-ecological saturation map, I think, can go anywhere, right? You can literally kind of identify, okay, who's the leader in these different sectors, and how do I reach them? What's the best way to get them this information? And that needs to really be place-based. I think for me, New Bedford, Fall River, what isn't kind of told, which is a condition for success, I believe, is developing the relationships with people. So like I needed to spend time developing relationships in Fall River. I couldn't just go to Fall River as a New Bedford resident and be like, well, let's go. It's a great initiative. We're going to do great work together. They were kind of like, who are you? And so what the strategy for implementation, I think there should be a little more emphasis on, like, you need to first build authentic relationships. Then you can introduce like how this will work in partnership and sell people on the idea. But like, for instance, we're doing a Instagram challenge starting in July, where we're asking people, and you should all know, I'll blast this out too, but we're asking parents or caregivers on the South Coast to just take pictures of, could be your niece, nephew, it doesn't matter who it is, just as long as it's a child, doing the basics, right? So like, if you're like, little kids at the wiffle ball tournament and you let them like throw the first pitch or whatever, it's like, that's explore through movement and play. Snap a picture of that, hashtag the Basics Southcoast, explore through movement and play, and it will go into that hashtag. And then at the end of that month, we'll look at all the pictures and we'll choose the best two. And then we'll ask people to like vote on Instagram. And then we're like, we've gotten local sponsorships from like auto shops to get your car detailed, or we're actually working on like getting like Minute Maids or something to like come clean your house, because that's something that everyone would appreciate with small children, or like to a free year pass to the Fall River Children's Museum or something like that, where I think that approach to that's not in the socio-ecological saturation map, but that to me is how you make this, like, you make the community really feel connected to the initiative, right? How else are you going to get the baker in New Bedford to feel connected to the basics? Like, I know he has 2 small children and about to have a 3rd, but as a business, how can he connect to us? And that's, I think, different than Boston, right? Like, I bet you could do that strategy in Boston, but we're a little more intimate here. So I could go into a neighborhood, relationships always matter, but I think for Fall River, New Bedford, they really matter, especially if you're based in one city and you're trying to do collaborative work in both, and everywhere in between. So that's kind of been the major, I think, shift for me. I haven't been a part of the Boston implementation, so I can't speak to that, but that's kind of the relationships piece has really been huge, and has taken time. They don't happen overnight. So.
You brought up a good point. I have a quick question on that. So you talked a little bit about authenticity. I just have a quick question about, any recommendations you may have for like a young person like myself who actually doesn't have kids, but any suggestions of how to get this type of content out to someone who may have kids? I'm not looking to step on any toes or advise, parents are, a bit sensitive on how to raise their kid, but any recommendations on how to spread the word about what you guys are doing here? Because I do think it's very important.
Yeah, so I have 2. The first one is when you go to like a baby shower or something for your friend, or your friend has a baby, or someone in your family has a baby, we created, and you can download them off of our website. We've created a gift certificate to the text messaging. So it's almost like, like a welcome baby, and then the text messages are free. They can sign up for free, but you kind of make it like a special thing, like in addition to my book I'm giving you, I also here's some free text messages. Your baby's a genius right now. Make the most of it. And I think the other piece is like always starting off with like, you're already doing so much of this, but have you heard of this, or have you heard of the basics? Like, have you heard of this movement? Like you should know about it, not even just for yourself, but to like share with anybody who has kids. Probably knows other people's kids. And so empowering that person you're telling to be a vehicle to the next person. So it's not so much about like, you really need this, so I'm going to give this to you. It's really an asset based, and like, you know, it's going to take a village to raise the next generation of, you know, climate change fighters, right? Like we need to be all hands on deck here to be building up the best society possible. You know, have you heard about the basics? And it's such like a easy, it doesn't sound like, have you heard of social emotional learning? Have you heard of, you know, it's not clinical. It's kind of an easy topic, and it's like cool. It's fun. So I would approach it like that. That would be my suggestion. And, or tell them about the Instagram challenge. They can win cool things. You know, it's like.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I had one more question about the clinicians that you all work with. So I understand that you are really well connected with Southcoast Health, and you said you work with primary care doctors, family docs, anyone else. Has there been any initiatives to include nurses, PAs, NPs, other people in the hospital?
Yes, so we are working on that strategic plan right now, because COVID happened right before we decided to be really like close partners. And so we decided to take the last year and really look out into the community in terms of marketing. But this coming year is really the time where we're going to look at the entire Southcoast system and break it down to like departments and where we want to kind of saturate. There's going to be a we're going to do a press conference in July with Keith Hoven and like the kind of, and some politicians and stuff at Southcoast Health. Following that, in about a month afterwards, we're going to have a huge kind of virtual PD info session on the basics. And I'm hoping that after, like, and everybody will be welcome to that. And I'm hoping that what we can glean from like a participant survey at the end is where the early adopters will be. Because I think you need to start with the early adopters, and then kind of like, you know, people need time to develop the relationship or hear about it or have some like fear of missing out. And then we'll kind of ripple it out through there. But I think the idea is to have it be everyone. You know, in 5 years, everybody at Southcoast Health will be at least aware of the basics, if not implementing. Yeah. And there's like a whole curriculum that was developed at Boston Children's Hospital around the 13 wellness visits that children have. So like there's already some of that. Emma, you mentioned like kind of are there any kind of like frameworks for the parent groups? There's a lot of different frameworks, and there's several that have been designed for healthcare, and particularly around training pediatric unit staff around anticipatory guidance, and using the basics as kind of a talking point to kind of plant the seed with parents around brain development. But family advocates, and I even like want to have the volunteer sector at Southcoast Health. They have a robust kind of volunteer team, but I want to welcome baby team, like who comes to kind of like, you know, jazz you up and give you some materials. They used to have that. A lot of these things we used to have, and then they went away. So we need to bring them back.
Awesome. Any more questions? I think this has been great. Thank you so much, Dr. Hanson-DeBello. This has been very informative, and you know, I'm excited some people were able to join, and also excited that we have the recording to share out via email and on our social media as well. So again, if you have any questions on NorthStar, visit our website. It'll be out on the email, and of course on our website and social media. And for Theresa Street as well, just let me know. And thank you again for joining this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Ray. It's been great.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.